Re-0, side story, witches after tea party, witches evaluation meeting.
I'm against you taking those girls along. The beautiful, blonde-haired, blue-eyed witch, Minerva, crossed her arms and puffed out her flushed cheeks as she declared that, anger filling her glimmering eyes, she was sitting on one of the 6 chairs positioned around the white table. Opposite to her, Echidna let out a choked hum. In response to her complaint, she raised her cup of tea off the table and gazed at the hot steam rising up from it. Echidna, I still haven't decided where I'm going to go now, but if possible, I'd like to go and see how much the world has changed in these 400 years. What do you all think about that? Minerva, now hold on just a minute. Didn't you hear what I said? How can you ignore me so easily? This is unacceptable. Utterly unacceptable. Minerva flared up in anger at Echidna as the latter tried to ignore her earlier complaint by changing the subject. With her face still flushed, Minerva grabbed Echidna by the scruff of her neck, however, that only caused her smile to grow deeper. Echidna, I was just joking. It sure would be nice if you didn't fly off the handle so suddenly. Minerva, you goddamn, ? You shouldn't always get so riled up, Minerva, ha. A languid voice called out to Minerva as she grew angrier and angrier, with her soft eyebrows raised on end. The voice belonged to a woman who was sitting hugging her knees on one of the chairs, submerged in a sea of her own hair. For better or for worse, that lethargic gaze belonged to Sekhmet. Sekhmet, Echidna's messing about with you, whoo. This wouldn't be the first time, ha. She's just going to take advantage of you every time you fall for them, whoo. Minerva, so you're saying I should just let her be? I'm completely against this. Minerva bellowed that she wasn't in the wrong with tears in her eyes, before then crouching down where she sat, looking completely at wit's end. 2 small hands came from her left and right, patting Minerva on the head. I don't think. Minerva-chan is in the wrong here, why you know? I agree, Nerva's not at fault. Donya's the real baddie here. Should I tear her apart? The ones who were comforting Minerva from both sides were Carmilla and Typhon. Unlike Carmilla, there'd been no bluff in the words the young Typhon had spoken. Left unchecked, there was a real chance she'd use her authority on her. Thus, Echidna shrugged her shoulders in apology. Echidna, I really wish you wouldn't do that. Someone as weak as I am wouldn't stand a chance against you all, if you were to turn against me. Besides, considering that I'm the host, you'd all fall together with me if I did. If you're going to use that as a threat, Donya, then isn't it just a little strange that we're all here with you like this? Echidna, you had to go and put me on the spot there. Right next to her, while restrained in her coffin, Daphne gave her a laugh. She'd already devoured her own chair and was now stuffing her face with the tea cakes that were set on the table, drool pouring down the corner of her mouth. Echidna let a wry smile slip onto her face as she looked on at the participants of the tea party. They were the witches, her friends. Echidna, you girls are always such an odd bunch, if I do say so myself. Minerva, I really don't want to hear that coming from you. Part 2. There once was a witch who plunged the world into a maelstrom of chaos and terror. The world then entered an age of darkness because of that being known as the Witch of Envy. Afterwards, said witch passed down into legend, becoming an object of terror that few dared to speak of, but there were actually 6 other witches of sin during that era, yet, they remained surprisingly unknown, with all of their deeds, personalities and such falling into obscurity. Echidna, or, to put it more accurately, they're in my citadel of dreams, after I collected their souls. Carmilla, why you? You know you did all of that on your accord though. Carmilla looked at Echidna reproachfully, as the latter placed the cup she'd been drinking out of down with a smile. That look of protest in her eyes was rather cute, but have too much of it and it would become poison. After all, Carmilla could make people devote their lives to her by merely staring at them and asking them to do so. None of the witches of sin could even come close to Carmilla in regards to how many people she'd made throw their lives away because she so desired. But, even then, Echidna, those are rookie numbers compared to Minerva, since she's the one who killed the most. Minerva, Typhon, oh no, someone's made Nerva cry. Was it Donya again? She really never learns her lesson. Large teardrops had welled up in the silent Minerva's eyes as she listened to Echidna's recollection. Yet, the reason she didn't pose any objections was because she was fully aware of how much of a mass murderer she was. Minerva's authority let her forcefully convert the destructive energy she could hold into healing power. Her punches and kicks were some of the gentlest in the whole world, but they didn't come cheap. Minerva saved the lives of many people, but at the same time, she also killed many with natural disasters. The witch who had saved and killed the most people in the world was Minerva. Nevertheless, the amount of lives she'd taken by no means repudiated the gentleness of her heart. That's why her point had been a deeply honest and sincere one. Minerva, how long do you plan to keep Colette and Palmyra around? The focus of Minerva's agenda became what they were going to do about those two girls from now. The witches were gathered here in the citadel of dreams that Echidna had built, merely as souls. However, it was a citadel only in name. A green hillock was situated there instead, with a tea party taking place on it. The topic they were discussing was regarding the two girls she'd met on her journey. Currently, both of them were outside of the citadel of dreams. To put it briefly, they were tagging along with Omega in the real world, who was possessed by Echidna. The girls were far more resistant to the miasma than your average person, based on the fact that they kept their wits about them even when coming into contact with the witch Echidna. Regardless though, Minerva, this really isn't good enough. It's not safe for starters. What are you planning on doing with them? Echidna, well, it's like I told the two. One of them was driven out from her hometown, and isn't even able to use the beasting bracelet that her parents left her as a memento. So I want to at least give them the knowledge and skills to keep them alive. Sekhmet, there must be something more to it, ha. I'm guessing it's not something you did out of kindness, whew. This isn't like you, considering you've brought chaos to so many countries for one reason or another, ha. Do you have a fever or something? Whew, Daphne, ooh, she was soaked in ice-cold water for quite a long time, wasn't she? Isn't it pretty much unheard of for a witch to drown to death? Ha ha ha, only within this world of dreams would sweets appear as much as one desired. Daphne, who was constantly stricken by insatiable hunger, laughed happily as she devoured them. The young Typhon tilted her head in response to what Daphne had said, and said, "Oh, Typhon, you're wrong Finny, I drowned 'cause all of that water came pouring in. Since I met my watery grave, I suppose I managed it before Donia." Echidna, indeed, when it comes to drowning, Typhon has a lot more experience than I do. We have to take our hats off to that. Minerva, no. We don't. Minerva snarled at Typhon and Echidna as they unmindfully shared a laugh together. Centuries had passed since the witches of sin had wreaked havoc everywhere. Now they were long dead, with naturally each of them having their own manner of death. Typhon's death by drowning had been one of those. Either way, Carmilla, we're getting off topic. We're getting off topic, aren't we? Echidna, yeah. I don't have a fever by the way. Nor does my body on the outside. Therefore, I can safely say that the decision I made to take them with me was done under normal circumstances. Daphne, so, you're saying that you actually meant what you said before? Echidna, joking aside, my body is quite weak as things stand. Echidna brought up the body she had on the outside, Omega's actual body, in response to Daphne's question. The body which she was possessing was a duplicate of Yazoo Maya's, fabricated using pseudo-odd as its core. It wasn't truly made from flesh and blood, rather from an artificial substitute that wasn't too far off from a spirit in terms of composition. Echidna, I'm making use of it in a way that wasn't originally intended. I had to get rid of quite a few things that I could pour myself into this vessel. Sekhmet, so you did something like that, whew. Don't you think the world is going to end this time, ha, if one of your flops goes out and about again, like the olden days? Whew, Echidna, whoa there, I didn't expect that from you, Sekhmet. You care about whether the world ends? Sekhmet, it's not the end of the world, ha, that I care about, whew. It's just that, if the world ends, your favorite things would be in deep trouble as well, ha. That's what my issue is, whew, Echidna. Sekhmet, it's as I've been telling you for a while now, ha. I'm more terrified of you losing your interest in this world than anyone else, whew. After all, there's no knowing what you would do, ha. Sekhmet spoke for an unnaturally long time. When she finally finished, she let out an utterly exhausted sigh. Then, she placed her head on her lap, and began to talk again. Sekhmet, I'm exhausted, whew. I don't have anything else to say, ha. Typhon, wah? Wah, you're going to sleep? Want me to sing you a lullaby? Typhon somewhat valiantly began to take care of the exhausted Sekhmet. Echidna took a glimpse at their topsy-turvy parent-child relationship, one that she was all too used to seeing, before then batting one of her eyes shut. Echidna, the point Sekhmet brought up now was rather interesting, but you needn't worry about it. I am not going to repeat my past mistakes. The problem I had with those was that I shaved off parts of my soul to make myself fit into the vessel. That's why this time, I shaved off a different part. Carmilla, a different part. Which one? Echidna, my powers. She had to regulate how much of herself she could pour into the vessel she called Omega, otherwise she wouldn't fit. This time around, Echidna had cast aside the powers she had no particular attachment to, in order to preserve herself. Thanks to that, she'd been able to step out from the sanctuary while still keeping her own identity, and in exchange for that, Echidna, it seems like I've regrettably lost most of the powers and skills I developed as a witch. I still have the knowledge, but I don't imagine it will be easy for me to regain my former strength. Daphne, oh, is that why that happened? You ended up burning a bit of the forest straight after you left the graveyard, right? It did kinda seem like you weren't able to control it at all, Echidna. Yeah, that's why. Minerva, wait up, why did you hesitate there? Are you sure it wasn't just down to a lack of effort on your part? Daphne had pointed out the incident where she'd messed up after leaving the sanctuary as Omega. When she'd used her magic like in the Citadel of Dreams, she'd imagined that she would have been able to put out the fire. However, that hadn't been the case. Part of the forest had burnt down as a result, with her almost dying after being caught up in the smoke. Echidna, of course not. What other reason are you saying it could be? Minerva, it could be that you're a complete dolt. You've always been someone who's quite careless in a lot of respects, ever since the olden days. How many times is it now that you've burnt forests down? Echidna, not that many. Please don't just spout out whatever you like. Carmilla, wasn't there a time that you went out? In public. Still wearing your nightgown? Echidna, whose side are you on, Carmilla? Echidna gazed at Carmilla as a look of dissatisfaction appeared on her face, having just been on the receiving end for her past slip-ups. Carmilla, however, just tilted her head wonderingly in response to her gaze. Carmilla, I'm on my own side. Why, you know? Echidna, I suppose so. You've always been that way. Echidna facepalmed as Carmilla put herself first without any shred of hesitation. Certainly, it was true that she'd set forest fires, and if need be, it was also true that she'd carelessly gone out in public wearing just her nightgown. Even so, the circumstances surrounding Omega now had nothing to do with those things. The key thing now was that Omega had lost her powers, making her extremely weak and fragile. Echidna, of course that doesn't apply when I materialize myself, even if it's just for a short amount of time. Most people end up dying from mental breakdowns just by looking at me, thanks to my miasma. It's just that I don't want to make heavy use of it. Anyhow, Typhon, there's someone you don't want to be found by, right? Typhon anticipated what Echidna was going to say, and spoke them for her innocently. The latter didn't bother to deny the point the young witch had made. She was speaking the truth. All of the witches here in the Citadel of Dreams knew that. It wasn't just Echidna after all. This someone was an enemy all of the witches had in common. Echidna, anyways, that's why I don't want to stand out. So rather than wandering around on my own and bringing about modern witch-related legends, Minerva, you mean to say it'll be far more convenient for you to mingle in as a trio of female travelers, yeah? Echidna, yeah, pretty much. There's a chance I'm inviting different kinds of dangers, but there's no way anyone would think that a witch would be moving about with other people. Minerva, if you say so. Her explanation should have made quite a lot of sense, being a valid reason for traveling along with Palmyra and Colette. But it didn't have much of an effect on the others, considering how long they'd known each other. She did like them, but sometimes, in instances like this, they were such a nuisance. Minerva, by the way, how long do you think it'll take to get your powers back? Echidna, right, I guess they'll be in a far better state in roughly 2 to 3 years. Though that's just an estimate from how I'm seeing it now. Minerva, I see. Then your deadline is 2 years. Minerva's compromise had been to set a deadline for the time Echidna spent with the girls. The very fact that she'd set the shortest time possible as the deadline was indeed typical of her good nature. Not even Echidna had any objections to that. Whether 2 years would take a long or short time must surely have been a foolish question for the witches, who hadn't yet breathed their last even in death. Daphne, so, where do you want to head off to Donia Donia? Echidna, right, there's a lot of prime candidates for that. Though well, for now I'd like to leave Lagunica. Many of you met your ends here in this country, it depresses me a bit. Carmilla, we actually all ended up dying here. Echidna, it's something we couldn't really help considering how things were at the time. Be that as it may, given that Gusteco is out of the question, I'd say Wallachia or Kararagai. Though from where we are, I'd say Kararagai. I've got a connection with that country since I helped found it, so I'm curious to see how it's doing now. Having settled on how they were going to deal with the girls, Echidna's interest moved over to the next subject. The other witches exchanged glances with each other, shrugging their shoulders as they witnessed Echidna coming more and more to life, a bundle of curiosity, an incarnation of the thirst for knowledge. None other than said person would whisper those words. Yet, from the eyes of her friends, this sort of stuff amounted to nothing more than simple nosiness. Sekhmet, it terrifies me that your nosiness, could quite easily destroy the world. Pooh. Typhon, wah? Didn't you say that you were done with talking? Typhon caught ear of Sekhmet's exhausted mutter and innocently cocked her head in confusion. Sekhmet gave her hair a brisk ruffle, before placing her hand over her mouth to shush her. Meanwhile, Minerva was letting out a bunch of yeah and ahas with a disgruntled look on her face as Echidna talked about her plans for the future. Daphne was there, God knows whether she was listening in or not, as well as Carmilla, who'd occasionally interject with some ill-choiced words. The witches' tea party, unleashed on the world, continued to take place for a while to come.